Welcome back to the session. We're now going on to the second question, and that is vaccines should be made compulsory for all South Africans over the age of 18. And I think we're going to have Team Julius coming on first. And there we see the names of the team: Asanda, Lekwetsi, Loveness, and Josejo. We await for you to join us. Remember that those of you that are not presenting and talking should mute your mics. So, okay, Loveness is here, Josejo is here. I don't know, Josejo, if you are Sutu or maybe you're Italian or something, and I'm pronouncing your name wrong. We will see. So, but who will be leading the presentation?
I'm Loveness, and my teammates Asana, Likweti, and Josejo, and we're in favor of the topic that vaccination should be made compulsory for all South Africans over 18. Mass vaccination have the potential of saving millions of lives and preventing serious illness. Approximately 3 billion people have been vaccinated around the world, while only 19.35% of the adult population have been fully vaccinated in South Africa. COVID-19 does not only cost individual lives. There are other important aspects that it impacts, like the economy, health, and well-being. The consequences of COVID-19 can be expected to continue and even worsen should the virus not be contained. Compulsory vaccination is essential for the containment of this virus. I'll now look at the justification and importance of compulsory vaccination. Next slide, please. Aspects of the South African jurisprudence grant the government with legal and constitutional powers over the inception of obligatory vaccination in a case of serious risk to public health. The National Act and the Constitution of South Africa detail circumstances in which treatment may be administered without the consent of the patient, and conditions in which human rights may be limited to restrict risk to public interest. Restrictions on individual rights imposed through vaccination are not arbitrary. South African law requires that they be based on a legitimate objective and must be strictly necessary for the achievement of this policy objective. Section 7(1)(d) of the National Health Act says that a health service may be compulsory provided to a patient in the provision that failure to treat the patient will result in a serious risk to public health. Section 36 of the Constitution also alludes that human rights may be limited only to the extent that the limitation is reasonable and justifiable, considering factors such as the nature of the right and importance of the purpose of the limitation. Consequently, a reasonable and justifiable purpose of preventing harm, reduction of the transmission rate, pressure relief to the health system, and achieving health protection permits the derogation of Section 12(2)(b) that mentions the right to bodily and psychological integrity, which includes the right to security in and control over their body. In the case of COVID-19, the objective of preventing transmission of infection is unambiguously in the public interest. It also requires that the restriction be proportional to the purpose of the limitation. So the bigger the risk to public health, the larger the restriction may be on individual rights. A precedent was made in view of the Minister of Health and Goliath case, where the judge ruled for the hospital detention and treatment of XDR-TB patients that refused treatment. Although this was a breach of the Section 12 rights, it was both necessary and mandated by Section 36 of the Constitution and Section 7 of the National Health Act because of the risk imposed on public interest. According to John Stuart Mill, the sole ground for the use of state coercion is when one individual risks harming others. The Disaster Management Act also, the Disaster Management Act COVID-19 regulations are also important to highlight. specifically Regulation 14, which states that any person who intentionally exposes another person to COVID-19 may be prosecuted for an offense, including assault, attempted murder, or murder. Next slide, please. We also have non-legal justification for compulsory vaccination for people over the age of 18 years. Compulsory vaccination is justified insofar as it has a superior cost-benefit profile compared to alternatives. And the alternatives include continual lockdowns and providing financial incentives. The rights of millions of people to earn a livelihood have been violated in this pandemic. Those arguing that we have not reached the stage of compulsory vaccination should remember that the Spanish flu killed approximately 50 to 100 million people. If people are not coerced to vaccinate for COVID-19, the repercussions may be similar or even more devastating. For vaccines to be more effective, more importantly in protecting the most vulnerable in the population, vaccination would need to achieve herd immunity. Herd immunity is a classic example of a positive externality where the social benefits exceed the personal benefits. Currently in South Africa, there's a lack of demand for vaccine, which limits vaccine rollout and delays the process of achieving herd immunity. Vaccine demand generation is a necessity and can be achieved by making vaccination compulsory. Herd immunity will be delayed by vaccine hesitancy, which will cost people their lives, delay the resumption of normal life, or at its worst, may never be achieved. The pace in which herd immunity is achieved is an important factor. In a pandemic like this, time equals lives. Compulsory vaccination will ensure herd immunity and fast-track the vaccination process. According to England's Public Health Week 27 COVID-19 vaccination surveillance report, mass vaccination proved to be effective against hospitalization and mortality. That is, it has reduced deaths associated with COVID-19 and hospitalization by around 70 to 85%. In South Africa, where we witness high levels of hospitalization almost every time we reach a new wave, compulsory vaccination will reduce the strain on the healthcare system because it has proven to be effective in the UK. Gauteng health statistics indicate that hospital occupancy rates in both the public and the private sector were at more than 90% during the peak of the waves. The capacity of our country's already resource-constrained healthcare system to cope with the emerging load as a result of vaccine refusal is concerning. To prevent the exhaustion of healthcare services, we need to allow for compulsory vaccination. I'll now look at the economic and social losses from COVID-19. Reaching herd immunity would allow for most economic activity to resume. The tourism and travel sectors are one of the major contributors to South African GDP, with a combined contribution of 6.9% in 2019. Leisure and business spending also decreased by 49.4% and 61% due to COVID-19 regulations. These effects are compounded by the loss of jobs in a country with already high levels of unemployment. However, COVID-19 has undone the achievement of the tourism sector. The World Travel and Tourism Council reports that in 2020, South African domestic tourism was down by 42.8%. We now look at the impact on human capital. The continued emergence of new waves and shifting on levels could result in the closure of schools, delaying reopening of the economy, and learners attending on a part-time or rotational basis once again. By June 2021, it is estimated that most primary school learners had lost 70% to a year of full learning due to rotational timetables. Moreover, 10% of households had at least one learner who had not returned to school by April 2021. In real numbers, that is between 650 to 750 children aged between 7 to 17 who were not attending school in May 2021 due to COVID-19. This, coupled with the loss of productive members of society, has serious implications for the South African current and future human capital. Moreover, school closures and rotational timetables have also resulted in an increase in care work for women, which brings me to my next point on the impact on social reproduction. The burden of school and ECD closures and part-time attendance has disproportionately affected women who bear the burden of childcare. The responsibility of caring for sick members also falls on women's shoulders. While men's employment levels had returned to pre-COVID levels by March 2021, women's employment was still down by 8%. Women who still have jobs are doing more housework than before. This of course has an opportunity cost, as time spent on reproductive work takes away from time that could be spent on productive work. Continued fluctuations in lockdown levels, reduction in paid work, and increases in unpaid care work have a bearing not only on the economy and women's participation in the economy, but also on women's bargaining power in the household and society at large. In conclusion, refusing to vaccinate goes as deep as taking food away from the poor. Because of the disproportionate social and economic impact of lockdown on poor households. Hence, mandatory vaccination should be mandatory vaccination should be a matter of when. Not only does it have private benefits, but social benefits as well. If science supports the necessity and efficacy of vaccines and a rich pool of evidence demonstrates that the effects of vaccine refusal are far-reaching beyond the personal level, is vaccine refusal really irrational and not a right impeding action? South Africa is well known for its culture of Ubuntu, which means that an individual should act in a manner which benefits the greater community. Mandatory vaccination is feasible as it promotes this principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loveness, and sorry to your other team members for the connectivity problems. Let's go straight into the next team to argue the opposite case, which is Team Piha.
Thank you, Michael. While I'm waiting for our team to join, I'll just say that we had our opposition, and we are ready to bring in our lawyer, who is Lufefe, and also our economist, Bianca, who went through the deep analysis regarding the cost benefits and the medical perspective. So yeah, I'll hand it over to them. We do have our support, which is Mcini and Dorcas on board. So yeah, over to you guys.
Fantastic. So we have Lufefe Kwababa, Bianca Laka, and Mcini. Is that right, Moyo? Yes. Let me hand over to you and give us the opposite case.
Greetings. Today we are discouraging the government from compulsory vaccinating people over the ages of 18 based on 3 principles. As you had heard, I'm coming from the legal perspective. Bianca will be bringing to us the health and economic perspectives of discouraging the government from compulsory vaccinating people. And as we start with the legal aspects surrounding compulsory vaccinations, it's important to remember that at the end of the apartheid era, it signaled a new dawn for South Africa. And this was a South African democracy that was based on the principles where the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa was deemed the supreme law of the land. Therefore, this requires that laws that are passed are consistent with the Constitution. Furthermore, Section 39 of subsection 2 of the Constitution directs that when any legislation is interpreted, the results thereof ought to always be in promotion of the spirit, purport, and object of the Bill of Rights. So, what do the Bill of Rights say? The Bill of Rights basically affirm the right to freedom, equality, human dignity, and freedom of movement, amongst other things. Therefore, it is important to note that Section 8 of the Bill of Rights states that all bills or laws that are applied are binding to the legislature, to the executive, to the judiciary, and all organs of state. So if the government was to pass a law saying vaccines are compulsory, they need to be consistent with the ambits of the Bill of Rights. Moreover, in the matter of compulsory vaccination, it's also important to note that consent is a fundamental principle of medical law. Basically, what we're saying here is that at the core of treating a patient medically is the requirement for the presence of a valid consent from the patient that you are treating. Doing so without the consent is actually a violation of a person's constitutional rights, and it actually transgresses the fundamental principles of medical law. Therefore, touching anyone without their consent violates one's right to medical integrity. Rendering the COVID-19 vaccinations compulsory would be negating the rights of the people. And I saw our opponents brought in the National Health Act as a reason to do so. And they quoted the case where a patient with XDR was forced to be treated. But I wish to highlight this in saying they did not read the act in completion, because the act basically states that a person's right to autonomy may come into conflict with the rights of larger society, especially in instances of communicable diseases. With Section 21 of the Act making provisions for mandatory medical examination, isolation, and quarantine of carriers. In such circumstances, individuals have to comply with medical examination and may be forcibly admitted to a health facility and put into quarantine, even if they refuse to consent to any of these measures. What is important to note, though, is that the Health Act quoted by opponents is for examination, isolation, and quarantine of people, and not vaccinating. However, the regulations also do not go too far to make treatment mandatory, and a vaccine is not isolation, is not quarantine, and people that have not contracted COVID are not even posing a risk to public health. So why would you be holding them against their will? Why are you limiting their rights? Therefore, there is no legislation providing for a government to compulsory vaccinate people. They can only go as far as restricting their movement so they do not endanger public health. Bianca is going to give us the health and economic perspective.
From a medical perspective, we note that the need for speed to reach herd immunity through compulsory vaccinations may result in negative outcomes on legal and economic scales, as demonstrated by the medical evidence below. First, people who receive vaccines may still acquire and transmit the virus. We note that while population risk may decline, the risk is nevertheless still present. Thus, even after taking the vaccine, the individual may still be a danger to society. Second, individuals taking immunosuppressive drugs, such as cancer patients, would not benefit from the vaccine. Thus, the law does not apply to everyone, and there is a degree of exclusion. Third, people with autoimmune diseases, also known as allergies, would not be able to take the vaccine due to possible unknown side effects. Fourth, individuals with non-communicable diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease would miss treatments because compulsory vaccinations would require more medical staff to administer vaccines. Of all hospital deaths in 2016 in South Africa, 51% were due to NCDs. That is already a high enough number. Fifth, there is no data on the effect of vaccines on people over the age of 80, and yet the law would make them compulsory for all people over the age of 18. Lastly, mutations in the virus may render administered vaccines ineffective, thus increasing wastage. Next, we consider an economic perspective on the issue. Noting that passing the law would be in violation of the Constitution of South Africa, we continue with this economic analysis, assuming the law can be passed without it being an infringement on human rights of South African citizens. We claim that the lack of information and excess of misinformation on the vaccine creates a negative externality of low vaccine demand, simply because individuals do not evaluate the costs and benefits of the vaccine. This negative externality is proposed to be internalized through the passing of a law that would make vaccines compulsory for individuals over the age of 18. But we argue that this is not the best solution. Telling people what to do is always met with retaliation and possibly even lower confidence in the vaccine. We propose that a strategy to reduce misinformation and negative perceptions around the vaccine would be a better institutional solution to the problem. Comparing the above mentioned strategies, that is, the law and the government's information strategy, in a comparative institutional analysis, we are able to determine which institutional strategy internalizes the externality with minimum cost. The analysis is simple. If the marginal cost exceeds the marginal benefit, the action should not be pursued. Here, the cost is taken both in an economic and abstract societal sense. The same goes for the benefits. We first discuss the law. The benefits of the law would be to get more people to take the vaccine, even if it is against their will, and even if it infringes on their human rights. There are, however, several costs, with the most prominent being a violation of the Constitution. In addition to this, the high degree of misinformation in communities means that forcing people to take the vaccine may result in increased lawsuits, especially in cases where individuals forced to take the vaccine may associate negative reactions with the vaccine and not other factors. This would increase costs to the government. Making the vaccine compulsory would also mean that unvaccinated people would not be allowed to travel, go to work or school, or even social venues such as restaurants. This puts a strain on business owners who lose a significant portion of their customer base. This can be compared to a lockdown, except this time it is induced by a law. Additionally, suppose the law means that university students cannot attend lectures without taking the vaccine. There will definitely be a retaliation from students being denied their right to education, which they paid for. Not to mention the large gatherings in the form of protests and demonstrations that should be avoided at this time. A comparative analysis cannot be conducted with a comparative institution, and a problem cannot be solved without a viable solution. Hence, we maintain that a more cost-effective and ethical internalization of the externality would be for the government to partner with the private sector and medical practitioners to reduce misconceptions around the vaccine. The benefits of this institutional arrangement include inducing the right type of demand. This means that people who are well informed of the vaccine and its expected post-vaccination effects are the people volunteering to take the vaccine. Another benefit is that it reduces missed demand, meaning people who would have otherwise not taken the vaccine due to lack of information now volunteer for it. Reduced lawsuits on supposedly adverse side effects form part of the benefits as well, and positive perceptions around the vaccine in communities, reducing stigma around getting vaccinated, and hence increasing the incentive to vaccinate. The costs associated with this strategy are few and mainly involve the collaboration of government and private sector to educate as many people as possible on the benefits of the vaccine. Sources of this information are widely available from clinical trials conducted in the country. Since the cost of enacting the law is greater than the benefit, we assert that the COVID-19 vaccine should not be made compulsory for individuals over the age of 18. Going one step further, in an attempt to provide a better solution to the problem, we propose that voluntary anti-misinformation on post-vaccine adverse effect approach is better and a more cost-effective and ethical for communities in the country and in the long run. In conclusion, considering the points made above by my teammates and I, we suggest that the vaccine should not be made compulsory for individuals over the age of 18. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Team Piha. And I think all that's left, again, I think I'm impressed by the quality of debates that are taking place in the chat. But for now, allow me to put the poll up and let's see who is the winner of this bout, this round. I hope you can see the poll. I'm just gonna do this. Okay, we have 10 votes. Looks like it's an overwhelming majority for the no. 80%. Those who say yes, it looks like you might have to impose your will on the majority if you wish to carry out this this policy. because it looks like you're going to have resistance from the majority of participants, at least the ones in this session. Yeah, I think it's an overwhelming majority, colleagues. As we say, we're still going to come to the real the voting with benefits. The voting with benefits will be conducted by the panel at the end of the next session. So allow me to close this poll. I don't think there's any chance of the yes guys winning this one, and we go into the next session.